Treaty of Versailles was signed in July 1919, but it had started in January 1919, a few months after the end of the war, the ceasefire or the armistice in November 1918. Now, the Germans had signed believing that the treaty would be based upon President Wilson's 14 points. They were wrong. Wilson had outlined his 14 points in January 1918 whilst the war was still going on, and those 14 points seemed to be quite a soft option for Germany, which Germany would quite happily agree to. The points that you probably need to know the most are obviously the League of Nations was in there, and the idea of national self-determination, which was the idea that people should be governed by whoever they want to be governed. So a minority group in, say, Czechoslovakia, who were Czech, should be able to be governed by Czech people, not Austrians or Hungarians or Germans. The other victors, Britain and France, had different views on what the treaty should be, and especially their public and public opinion were very, very in favour of a harsh or even Carthaginian peace. Carthaginian because when the Romans beat Carthage, they literally burnt it to the ground, so it means a harsh and brutal peace. Now, in Britain, for example, they called for the Kaiser, the German king, to be hanged and to make Germany pay and bring the leaders of Germany to trial and put them on a war trial. The French were even more in favour of a Carthaginian peace, if it were possible, as their industrial heartland in the northeast of their country had been absolutely destroyed in World War I, and they had lost more men and more property than the British. Their leaders differed in their opinions. Whilst Lloyd George had to, because there was an election in December 1918 between the end of the war and the peace process, Lloyd George had to get elected, promised that he would make Germany pay as far as he possibly could, as far as they were capable. And in private, he wasn't necessarily of that view. He believed that an overly harsh peace would cause problems in future, and he issued a memorandum called the Fontainebleau Memorandum, in which he predicted that a harsh peace would cause feelings of revenge in Germany, and also that there would be a problem with too many small states round a still powerful Germany. Okay, Lloyd George and Britain both did recognise that they had to keep Britain as the strongest naval power, which, as always, is at the centre of British foreign policy. Now, Clemenceau was slightly more in tune with his public. He personally, as well as politically, felt the peace had to be totally Carthaginian, especially seen as during his lifetime France had been invaded twice by the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War and in World War I. So, because France was stagnant in terms of its population and Germany's population was expanding, he believed that if things were left to go on like that, Germany would be powerfully, more powerful militarily in the future, so that something had to be done to protect France's borders from Germany. And security for France, in his opinion, was to be done by totally destroying Germany's ability to invade France in the future. So they're the three main allies at Versailles and their views on what should happen. The other two main victors in the First World War, who were both present at Versailles, yet do not get counted in with the big three, despite them being fairly powerful countries, are Italy and Japan. Now, Italy, if you remember, was in the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, but refused to join the war because it considered it to be an aggressive action by Germany, and their alliance was a purely defensive alliance. However, in 1915, they were effectively bought into the Triple Entente gang by promising them certain gains in the event of an Allied victory at the Treaty of London in 1915. So, at the end of the war, and the Allies have won, Italy go to Versailles, expecting to be given the Dalmatian coast and parts of Croatia. Orlando, their Prime Minister, is sometimes included in the Big Four, but because he spoke English poorly, he was marginalised by the others and left out. Over this, though, he was not going to budge, and he wanted to make sure he and his country got these gains that they were promised. Woodrow Wilson, was the one who really disagreed, because he said that would go against the principle of national self-determination, leaving lots of people who weren't Italian under Italian rule. They had a bitter argument, and it underlines how deals were done and compromises were made at Versailles between all the different powers, in that it was an unhappy deal, an unhappy compromise. The Italians didn't get what they were expecting, although they did get an area called South Tyrol, which included hundreds of thousands of German speakers, which did not please Wilson because that was against national self-determination. Therefore, both parties were not pleased. The Japanese got some of Germany's colonies, and although they didn't want them to be mandates, they wanted direct rule, and they didn't get that. They were fairly pleased with what they got, and were not really interested in discussing anything to do with Europe. So once they had discussed what was going to happen in the Pacific, they were happy to go on their merry little way.